All right, so let's get started. I want to again welcome all of you to our first ever, our inaugural Code Connects live virtual learning event. I am Dr. Rumeet Billan. I am going to be your host as well as your moderator for today. I am the CEO and Chief Learning Officer at Viewpoint Leadership Inc., and also a proud member of the Board of Directors at Code. As I mentioned just a few moments ago, we are all in for an absolute treat. Wait until you hear about the speakers that we have today. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge that we are recording this event in Canada's capital city of Ottawa, Ontario, on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. For the next hour, so just to lay out what we're going to do, for the next hour, we've got about 40 to 45 minutes of content, and then we want to hand over the floor to you. So as we go through the content portion of our time together, if you have any questions that come up, please feel free to use the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of the webinar. And if you want to reflect on what's being said throughout our time together, please feel free to use the chat box. We've left it open. If you want to reflect, share an experience, please feel free to do so there. So in terms of our hour together, we get to hear from a wonderful panel of gender and education experts and specialists, and we're focusing on the question today of what does it take to create girl-positive classroom environments? And tonight, who do we have with us? And for some of us, it may be morning, but who we have with us today is Nora Files, the former head of Secretariat at the United Nations Girls Education Initiative. And she's going to be focusing on how we can put gender equality at the heart of education. Nora is going to be speaking about the opportunities as well as challenges and looking at this lens from a global scale. We also have Claudia Mitchell joining us today, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Institute of Human Development and Wellbeing at McGill University. And Dr. Mitchell is going to be introducing us to the concepts of gender responsive pedagogy. We also have a video from Alcina Sitoe, who's a program manager at Progresso, which is Code's partner organization in Mozambique. And she's got a special video message for all of you. And she's going to be reflecting on what creating a girl-positive classroom means to her. And of course, we've got Scott Walter, who is the executive director at Code. And Scott is going to share with us how Code places girls at the heart of its programs and aims to foster the creation of classrooms environments where girls can thrive. So we have a jam-packed hour, and again, we want to make sure we get to your questions and provide answers to you. We've got the chat function open, the Q&A box open. I will be monitoring and moderating today. My 20-second introductions to our wonderful panelists don't do them any justice. To view their full bios, you can go to code.ngo/events. So let's get started. To kick us off, I would love to hand it over to our executive director at Code, Scott Walter, who has had 4 decades of experience in education and international development. Scott, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Rumeet. And a sincere thank you to our panelists, Dr. Claudia Mitchell and to Nora Files. And as well, thank you to Alcina Sitoe, who, as mentioned, will be joining us via pre-taped video. And of course, thank you to everyone joining us today. We really appreciate your interest. Given the brevity of today's symposium, we've purposely decided to limit our panelists to pedagogical experts. So it's indeed a pleasure to be part of today's discussion on creating girl-positive classrooms. Code has long understood the dramatic results that can be achieved when we collectively make it a priority to empower women and girls to learn and succeed. We use an evidence-based approach to inform girls' education, and we strive to remove barriers that contribute to the marginalization of girls. Code is somewhat unique in this regard, and it's why this is such an important discussion for us. We are not a bricks and mortar organization. So much of what we support happens in the classroom. And in that regard, our objective is a level playing field to make sure everyone has an equal chance, to make it possible for girls to pursue their education on an equal footing as the boys. And the evidence shows that when girls have that level playing field, they will perform, even outperform their male counterparts. So, how do we define success? One, by the acquisition of learning outcomes. In particular, all girls reading by age 10. Reading is the gateway skill to ongoing learning and higher order thinking. Reading by age 10 is a key performance indicator for the World Bank's definition of learning poverty, and that's now being adopted by the G7 and others. Two, success means girls having the ability and confidence to stay in school and complete basic education. And three, success means girls are able to transition to and complete secondary school, and from there to go on to further education opportunities or to seek gainful employment. Ultimately, success is when young girls like White Lynn have equal opportunity to realize their ambitions. So how can this be accomplished? What does a level playing field look like in regard to pedagogy, teacher development, availability of reading and learning materials, accelerated learning, etc.? In this regard, code programs support, but are not limited to, first, advocacy, advocating for girls' education, promoting the benefits of educated girls to their parents and to their communities, and importantly, advocating for girls to start school at the age appropriate level. We know that when girls start school late, if they don't catch up quickly, they're likely to drop out. In recognition of this challenge, CODE's Girls Accelerated Learning Initiative in Liberia offers accelerated learning focusing on the foundational skills and paired with sexual health and life skills development. Second, girls need female role models in their classrooms. In many of the countries where CODE operates, women are severely underrepresented in the teaching profession. In Sierra Leone, for example, only 29% of qualified teachers are women. The presence of women teachers in schools is important in creating safe environments, promoting gender equality, and providing positive role models and mentorship to girl students. Through the Transforming Girls Education program, jointly funded by Global Affairs Canada, CODE is piloting an innovative scholarships initiative to support 100 young women in gaining their formal teaching qualifications in Sierra Leone. It's a pilot that we hope to scale in time. Third, girls need to see themselves reflected positively in reading and learning materials. CODE has been a champion of access to and use of quality, relevant reading and learning materials for many, many years. After all, if we want kids to become readers, they need something to read. But just as kids in general better engage with text when they see themselves reflected in the pages, girls benefit by seeing positive depictions of who they are and what they can do. Materials that reflect girls can do anything. CODE has long worked with authors in the publishing industry writ large to support the creation of appealing storybooks and informational text that carry positive images and do away with outdated and stereotypical notions of what girls and boys can and cannot do. This is truly a hallmark of our work on a global basis. I could show you many examples, but here's one from our program in Sierra Leone, which is aimed at grade 5, but it's a series of stories with that positive role model and positive possibility in the pages. Fourth and finally, teachers need to have the skills to actively and effectively engage girls in their learning and to create environments that yield the best possible learning outcomes for girls. In this regard, we support professional development for teachers in gender-responsive pedagogy, including mainstreaming gender equality throughout teacher training institutes. Teachers and teacher trainers are central to the education system and the transmission transmission of values, knowledge, and the development of human potential. Now, Claudia will be talking more about this, but it's also exemplified by our Better program in Mozambique. The program, jointly funded by Global Affairs Canada, is working to integrate gender-responsive curriculum into pre-service teacher preparation at a national scale, working closely with the Ministry of Education, including the development of manuals that carry a strong emphasis on gender-responsive pedagogy. So on that note, I'm now going to turn to Alcina Sitoe, a colleague and an educator from Mozambique who works on the Better program with Associação Progresso, itself a strong and highly respected education organization from Mozambique. Here's Alcina in a pre-recorded video.
A girl-positive learning environment means that girls are treated with the same respect as everyone else in school. Teachers should know that girls are intelligent. They're capable of doing many things like any other person, like the boys, and they should not be biased against girls. Teachers should encourage everyone in school or in class to speak and participate and pay attention to girls because they tend not to participate as much as the boys. In a gender equal classroom, girls should be seen as just as intelligent as boys. This means that teachers cannot give challenging tasks to boys and give simple yes/no questions to girls because of the preconceived idea that girls are weak. Girls are not weak, they just need to be given the same opportunity as boys have. Girls should be given the opportunity to develop their analytical and critical thinking with challenging questions appropriate to the class they are and never considered less than boys. In every school, to support girls, there should be someone appointed, preferable a female teacher, or because the teachers in some rural schools are so few, if possible, it can be also a mother that collaborates with the school. That person could talk to girls. It's someone that girls could talk to and feel safe enough to discuss their issues with. And that person should respect and keep private whatever the issues the girls bring for discussion, unless it's legal issues such as gender-based violence, sexual harassment, rape, etc. Then she should follow the mechanisms to solve the issue, but never forget to protect the girl who is the victim. Because sometimes in the process of solving the issues, the girl is exposed, and that could lead to lack of trust from the part of the girls in school. It's important to represent women and girls in a way that promotes gender equality when it comes to books and learning materials. They should be well represented, not just women fetching water or taking care of the baby or doing something in the field, in the vegetable garden, which are usually common activities for women in the rural areas in Mozambique. Women should be well represented with good stories and pictures, and as much as possible also the stigma that it's associated with gender should be broken when it comes to learning materials and books. The topic of gender equality and inclusion is always included in the training sessions that and other initiatives that the project promotes, not only in the colleges but also in the primary schools with teachers. This topic is considered very important it's cross-cutting. It has to happen. It has to be included in all areas of the project. The Better project also promotes participatory methodology, and we know that one of the fundamental principles of participatory methodology is that everyone, regardless of their sex or gender, should be given opportunity to participate actively in the activities. Teachers have that in mind today because of our trainings and all sensitization that we do, and they do their best to provide equality, involve equally boys and girls in the class or other school activities.
All right. Thank you, Scott, for sharing your thoughts and reflections on Code's commitment to placing girls at the heart of your approach. It was also so important for us to hear from Alcina. What I'd like to do next is I'd like to introduce Nora Files. Now, she is the former director of the United Nations Girls Education Initiative, a multi-stakeholder partnership committed to advancing gender equality in education and the empowerment of girls and women through education. Welcome, Nora. And Nora, I have to say, I have heard if we rewind back to 1984, you may or may not have a connection with Code. Did I hear correctly?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks so much for the invitation, and yes, the prompt. It's really fun to be on this panel and to reconnect with Code. When I was a brand new educator going out into the field in 1984, I worked as the education specialist with the Belize Agency for Rural Development and managed a code project dealing with reams of paper and a Gestetner machine to create learning materials. So it's really great to be back in the discussion with Code. So thanks very much for this invitation. Now, I have been invited to, first of all, I need to say, I feel a little bit like a fraud because I'm 2 months out of being the head of Secretariat for UNGEI. And that gives me 2 months to have lost a lot of memory, it feels like. However, I'm delighted to be with you and to share with you my thoughts about putting gender equality at the heart of education. Now, girls' education is in no way a new issue, but in 2021, putting gender at the heart of education is totally current and a topic of discussion this month at some of the most influential and political financial tables. I'd like to share with you a few of the current developments which might be relevant for the discussion today. COVID has revealed the pre-existing gender inequalities which continue to impact the lives of girls, their access to learning, and their likelihood to return to school when classrooms reopen. Today, hard-won gains of the last 25 years are being rolled back. This is all familiar to you, I know, but it's one of the most important developments over the last period of years to put girls' education and gender equality education front and center in the global community's agenda. Millions of girls across the globe have paid the highest price of the COVID-19 school closures, forced into child marriage, subjected to FGM at higher rates, or exposed to increased gender-based violence. We all know examples from various countries, but let me just share a few. Calls to the child line in India. Oops, could you go back, please? Thank you. Calls to the child line in India seeking help to escape or avoid early marriage jumped by 20%. Rural adolescent girls in Mali, when schools closed, were sent to the urban centers by their families to find work. Now, FAWE, UNICEF, and other partners are running campaigns to try and bring girls back home and get them back into schools as they reopen. In parts of Uganda, district education officers are concerned that there will be no girls in middle school as they are at home either pregnant or with young children. These rates, the stats that I've shared and these stories which you know and I'm sharing now are quite heartbreaking and astonishing, but they certainly do galvanize interest in the importance of focusing on what has gone wrong. As the evidence has become more and more available about the impact of school closures on girls, the global community has acknowledged how fragile our past achievements have been and prompted leaders in this field to think concretely about how education needs to transform in order to address these underlying structural issues. Clearly, systematic inequality will only continue if the gender-specific barriers to education are not addressed. The call for gender-responsive education, education reform, laws, policies, plans, and budgets that aim at system-wide change to prioritize equality and integrate gender-responsive classrooms and all aspects of education management is part of the new focus, the renewed focus. Yes, it calls for the kind of excellent examples of gender-responsive classrooms, which Scott and our colleague Alina from Alcina from Mozambique mentioned just now. Those kind of examples which respect all students equally and provide them with equal opportunities in school to succeed. Classrooms free of violence, schools with services needed for all students to remain in school and learning through adolescence. WASH, nutrition, comprehensive sexuality education. And they also call for active engagement of communities and youth leaders. Can you turn the slide for us, please? Thank you. Now, I wanted to highlight for you just a few of the important resources which have been developed by colleagues offering concrete recommendations about how to address the social, financial, and school-based barriers in order to ensure gender is at the heart of education in the classroom now, during school reopening, and through education system reform. The first one at the top there, you may well be familiar with. It was put together, it's called Building Back Equal. It gives the impression that we are not interested in going back to where we were, because that was insufficient and it was not doing the job. So we want to build back differently, building back equal. It's a girls back to school guide put together by Malala Fund, UNESCO, Plan International, UNGEI, and UNICEF. It provides a really quite useful set of recommendations. I strongly suggest you find that online. The second resource I wanted to share is also put together by one of the partners for the Building Back Equal, the UNICEF South Asia Regional Office, and was published last year. It draws heavily on the GBE, Gender Responsive Sector Planning guidance, as well as other material. I've provided one short quote about what gender responsive education means from their perspective. It recommends a system-wide approach to school reopening, bring a gender lens to education analysis, and take steps to remove the bias and discrimination, gender bias and discrimination within and across education systems. The third image that I'm sharing with you is from our colleagues, I used to say that, sorry, my UNGEI days. UNGEI convenes and hosts a coalition of youth voices, youth activists called Transform Education. And they have been leading a very strong advocacy campaign over the last year to put youth at the heart of the policy table, put them at the policy table and as partners in outreach, reaching out to those who've been most affected by school closures, themselves and adolescent girls. There's a lot of online material put out by Transform Education. It's also worth really looking to them for content. Could you turn the slide, please? Thank you. Now, I noticed just now that reference to the G7, UK-led G7 is on the CODE website, so that's extremely useful resource for you. I wanted to draw our attention to the importance of this upcoming G7 summit. We know that COVID has galvanized the G7 under the UK's leadership to make girls' education a core feature of the 2021 G7 agenda. And we also know the importance of G7 as a key platform for supporting social change, including girls' education. G7 can use its collective power as the most influential and as among the most influential and advanced economies. The G7 has a proud history of championing the right to education for girls with solid foundations of success of the Charlevoix Declaration under Canada's leadership and the Gender at the Center initiative under the French. A Girls' Education Declaration was released by the Foreign and Development Ministers this month, and they integrated gender equality and girls' education into the policy and financial commitments in their ministerial statement, which I've quoted here. We look forward to the outcome of the G7 summit in June, and we also know from past experience how important it is to continue to advocate for the implementation of these promises. As a footnote, I must say that in parallel to this is the confusing and very disturbing situation with UK aid. UK made girls' education a development priority, and at the same time, earlier this month, they announced the launch of a £55 million investment for girls' education, a What Works hub, a research hub focusing on advising governments on effective education reform and support for girls' enrollment. At the same time, it also reduced the UKA budget for girls' education by 40%. And this included the elimination of UK support to many small community-based NGOs providing education to marginalized girls. The impact of these cuts will be significant, and the message to the global community is very concerning. Let's turn to the last slide, please. Finally, we must acknowledge the importance of the upcoming Global Education Summit in July, the GPE replenishment. Equally important is the fact that the GPE 2025 puts gender equality at the core of the new strategic plan, including a new girls' education thematic fund. Now here I have shared with you the target figure they're trying to raise, as well as the financial quote. But the whole comprehensive work of GPE, including their focus on gender responsive education sector planning, the Education Out Loud Fund, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, supporting civil society organizations around the world to advocate for education, and the KICS initiative, the research program, which supports innovations and options for scale-up of good practices, with a major focus of the integration of gender and inclusion across the breadth of this work. Here too, your role as civil society organizations, members of the GPE board, academics and others is important to continue to support and challenge GPE to fully implement its strategic plan in such a way that it does engender the whole education sector and build and enhance gender equality broadly. Now, I'd like to leave the last word to a young woman from Mozambique. So let's now play the really short video. And thank you for your time today.
Para mim, reconstruir a igualdade significa transformar as escolas em espaços seguros para que nós, raparigas, possamos desenvolver mais habilidades e conhecimentos. E os governos têm a responsabilidade de formar professores com conhecimento sobre dinâmicas de gênero, capazes de promover direitos e oportunidades iguais dentro e fora das salas de aulas.
Nora, thank you so much. Truly appreciate that. We've already got some wonderful questions coming in, and a reminder to the participants joining today, please do put your questions into the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of the webinar, and please feel free to continue putting your comments, reflections, and experiences in the chat box. We do have Claudia Mitchell, Dr. Claudia Mitchell, joining us next, and after Claudia's content piece, we are then going to get into the Q&A. Again, let's use the Q&A box at the bottom of the webinar to put your questions in, and the chat box to put in your experiences, reflections, comments. We've already got such a great conversation going. So Nora, thank you again. It is an honor to introduce Dr. Claudia Mitchell, Distinguished Professor in the Faculty of Education at McGill University. She is also the Director for the Institute of Human Development and Wellbeing and the founder and director of the Participatory Cultures Lab. Claudia, welcome, and over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, everyone. And I'm just going to have a PowerPoint slide here coming up, but thank you to Code, my colleagues at Code, for inviting me to participate in this event this afternoon or this evening. And I think Nora and I have shared, this is the first time we've shared a screen perhaps, but we've been on many platforms together. And I saw someone in the chat say, it's great to still see people who are still working on this. We are still working on this. It seems like it's a long-term project. What I want to do is jump in with maybe talking a little bit more about, in this response to the question, how do we create these girl positive spaces? I'm very interested in teaching and teachers. And I think Nora has reminded us, and so the big picture of how key funding is and the strategic planning of this. And Alcina in her video very much reminded us of the everyday experiences of girls in classrooms in Mozambique, along with what we just heard of Kimi. My work with teachers and teacher educators, especially in Sierra Leone, is what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. We've heard the term gender responsive, pedagogies, gender transformation, and I think what we're really, what's the kind of the evolution is to kind of see how do we make these real in classrooms? How do we take the tremendous amount of research that goes on around girls' education and theoretical pieces and the gender lens and make it into something practical? So I'm going I want to start with this slide of moving from what we call the gender sensitive platform, which is really the foundation of the work we're doing today. And everything that Alcina referred to and Scott about having male and female characters showing the potential for transformation is absolutely critical. So everything that we've been doing since the 1990s and earlier, looking at gender sensitive classrooms and textbooks, are absolutely foundational. They're where we start. But then where we move to is how to think about classrooms or teachers who are really challenging the norms, challenging what's going out there, and challenging the next step in terms of bringing these kinds of gender transformations into the classroom. So I'm just going to talk about 5 examples or features of what I call a gender responsive approach, or what feeds into this, and I'll end on reference to some new materials. The number one piece, I think, or a really critical piece, and I think it picks up very much on what Nora is saying, is teachers and teacher educators have to be at the forefront of challenging gender norms, which you see before you in the handwriting is an artifact. Probably everyone on this screen who's ever done a workshop anywhere in the world with teachers and participants in chart paper, but it's actually, if you can look closely, which you can't. So therefore I put some examples, I pulled out a few examples. A group of teachers in Sierra Leone went around trying to check what do they see as the critical gender norms that they actually have to challenge. So here are 3. Girls do all the domestic work while the boys remain idle. Girls should engage in private jobs while males should be in the public sector. Girls don't participate in decision making. So all they were doing in this process was really identifying what is the intention. What are we trying to break down in classrooms? And so in a gender responsive pedagogy, we have to start with that. And it has to come from teachers and teacher educators who are the ones who are out there seeing what the inequalities are. The second piece I want to look at, so just to move the slide, Cosmo, is identifying power inequities. Those of you who know me know I love drawing, work with drawings, and we've collected many drawings with teachers and teacher educators and children, but it's what you do with those drawings. So this is an example of not only identifying the power inequities, but having a reflexive protocol for looking at that. So this is an example we've used with teachers. What do you see here? What's really happening here? How does this relate to our lives? Why does this situation exist? And what can you or I as a teacher do about it? So this show and protocol, you can use photos, you can use it with drama, you can use it with drawings, but is to really get at, again, the challenging pieces of what's going on. And power inequities are absolutely critical to look at. Moving to the next slide, Cosmo. Working with men and boys. We heard Alcina say that there actually aren't that many women teaching in rural schools. We know that this is a critical area to address, but we are going to continue to have men and boys in schools. We have men, many men leading in areas. We're trying to change the overall balance. But in the meantime, if we aren't working with men and boys, we're probably not working with the majority of the participants who are in the schools and teachers' colleges where we're working. So it's not just to include men and boys, but what kinds of questions and what kinds of tools can address help embark upon a process of engagement. So my three favorite questions with male teachers and teacher educators: how might life have been different in Sierra Leone if you've been born a member of the opposite sex? So having people really reflect on how different that would be. What advice would I give my younger sister if she wanted to attend this college? Why? If you could change 3 things to create gender equality at this college, what would you do? So really taking that notion of positionality and reflexivity and making that a central part of the question. The next slide, please. Thank you. So reflection through engagement. We've heard several references to media campaigns. This is one from Sierra Leone. Hands Off Our Girls, a very, very direct campaign led by the First Lady. We used it with teachers in Sierra Leone, and we recommended this beyond to sort of say, work with local materials. Very often we're looking at, well, gender in the world, but gender in this community. What does it look like? What are the messages? What if you had to design a message in this college? What would your slogan be? What images would you want to use? How would you create a media poster? These may sound like, oh, we've been doing these for years, but I think it's this idea of bringing it together with reflection and with engagement. The next slide, please. Thank you. Nora referred to participatory methods and the voices of young people. Alcina mentioned participation, drawing, photo voice, drama, the different types of engagement. I've just put one up here on cell filming because we actually started working on this in Mozambique. We did an incredible amount of work. I think the teachers did an incredible amount of work at the 4 teachers colleges and the students on making films about gender equality and inequality and school-related gender-based violence, and getting those images into the discussion pool. So I have we have lots of steps of, brainstorming, creating a storyboard, filming, and so on. And we've worked with many different groups because it's that sense of actually looking at the images. What's the picture and what's the picture you want to change? So again, the gender responsive pedagogy is really about making this work very visible and visual, and a space where people can talk, reflect, debate. And unless you have people doing that, the chances of reaching the goals that I think we've talked about are really, really difficult. My last slide, Cosmo, is really, Nora has mentioned some excellent resources. I just wanted to put another one out there. Based on our work in Sierra Leone, my colleague, Dr. Lisa Starr at McGill, and I worked with teachers teacher educators to put together a gender responsive pedagogy guide. Much of the work that I've talked about today around working with men, participatory work, challenging gender norms and challenging power inequities are kind of laid out in what we think is a very practical basis and something that we think will really support teachers. We've had a lot of great feedback from the activities. The guide itself is going to be up on the CODE website, I think within the next 10 to 12 days, and probably elsewhere. But I think what we're seeing in this kind of work is this: we have to pull these topics together, I think, in really focused ways. And I think the notion of gender responsive pedagogy is a key tool to thinking about gender transformation. We know there's lots more research to do. We know there's lots more money that needs to go into this and targeted initiatives. But the idea of starting with, or not starting with, expanding the repertoire of possibilities where teacher educators and teachers can be at the heart of making girls and gender equality at the heart of education. So that's me. Look forward to the Q&A, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Fantastic, Claudia. Thank you so very much. And we are right on time. We have about 17 minutes and we've got lots of fantastic questions that have come in. So we're going to get right into it. And for those who want to ask questions, please pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the webinar screen that says Q&A. Get those in there and we are going to try to get to as many as possible. Now, we've got 3 questions related to the pandemic, COVID-19. So I'm going to direct 3 questions to all 3 panelists. I would love to start off with Nora. And my question to Nora is going to be how the COVID-19, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on girls' education around the world? And then I want to go over to Claudia and ask about how COVID-19 has impacted political conversations regarding gender equality in education. And then I'm going to go over to Scott and talk about our response at Code to the impact that pandemic has had on girls and girls in education. So Nora, can we start off with you?
And you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to steal a little bit from Claudia and maybe switch with her, because my former 10 years has been all about the politics of education. Sitting in the UN, trying to push colleagues to be to deliver on their commitments, which is all the politics of the world. What we have seen, which has a gender component as well as education change broadly, is the importance of health and well-being as core to education. That in fact, that's front and center in all the discussions with the World Health Organizations and others about reopening school. Is it a safe, healthy place to be? And given the stress on children, on girls, this spike in gender-based violence around the world which followed the shutdown almost immediately, the politics of safety, of ensuring that gender-based violence was addressed and that psychosocial support was provided in any reopening. Now, as well as the ongoing support for girls, that has actually carried over into programming. Now, of course, a lot of the programming which would have been designed face-to-face, the services and provisions to address violence, to support girls in protecting themselves and to hotlines, etc., face-to-face places were closed, but many organizations went online, followed up with students by phone, actually provided programs by phone, as well as just checking in with students. So the discussions have shifted from a focus, although learning is front and center because the entire world is in a panic for how much learning loss we've seen. They're also recognizing that learning plus health and well-being, those must go hand in hand. Child protection and protection in particular from gender bias and violence, the impact of that of gender-based violence in schools, but in homes now, focused on women and girls and other children. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Nora. Claudia, would you like to add to this?
Oh, sure. I'll just jump in and thank you, Nora, for you opened up the politics space very vastly. I think a couple of things that I wanted to say. First of all, I think COVID really struck hard on recognizing the importance of having a gender lens and a gender-based analysis from the get-go. I don't know if we've been as successful at that as we should have been, but the recognition that, oh my goodness, as we saw in the AIDS pandemic, we'll kind of look at this in a really broad way. Everybody's affected and infected. And then, oh no, wait a minute. Some people are more affected and some people are more infected. And I think that idea of you know, how can we take what we already know about the analysis at the beginning and put that right out there. And of course, we were never fast enough, but I think we kicked in a lot faster than we might have like 10 years ago or something like that. So I think that was really critical. The other thing that I've seen, that especially in my work in South Africa, is it's this isolation. A couple of my colleagues and I wrote a paper called, you know, doing ethnography at a distance. And we meant that both literally and all other ways, metaphorically. But recognizing how difficult it is to continue to do the work that people are doing. And Nora has given us many examples of what people have, you know, many possibilities, but that sheer recognition that the lives of girls and young women are very different. We can't always reach them. And sometimes it's even immoral to try to continue the kinds of programs that we've been doing that when food and basic security trump some of the things that we think, oh, well, we want, you know, what we want to do in terms of entrepreneurship or a whole range of things, that the basic security issue that Nora has raised about gender-based violence in the home and the basic pieces around just like food and food security as areas that kind of trump all else. And I think that has really made us think quite differently about our programming and what's at the heart of and what's basic and what things you cannot fail to take to acknowledge, because those are, nothing else can go on without safety and food security issues. So that's me.
Absolutely. Claudia, thank you so much. Scott, did you want to add a comment or two? And then I've got another question that I'm going to head your way after that.
Well, let's go straight to the other question then. I think Claudia and Nora have covered it well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And this actually connects to kind of Code's response, but I'm going to combine two questions in terms of the challenges the organization may face, whether it's from religious organizations or individuals, when promoting gender equality, and perhaps in some areas where there may be a strong culture that does not support girls' education. So what challenges and has Code received opposition when promoting gender equality?
I saw that question come up in the box, and I was thinking, whoa, that's a big one. I think to begin with, Code, we work through partners. We work through national education partners, and together with those national education partners, we work very closely with ministries of education, educational institutions, etc. So if I think I can say if there's a big backlash against a program, we're probably not even there to begin with. We're probably not starting that program in the first place. But generally speaking, I mean, we find that, I mean, most of our programs are focused in Africa. And in Africa, we're getting close to universal enrollment in early primary education. So parents do want their girls in school. And parents, once the girls are in school, they want them to succeed. So to us, it's more of a question, really the big question, in addition to everything else we're talking, but the big question is the quality of education, like the quality of education on offer. If girls or boys are not learning, the parents are going to pull them out. So that's a big focus for us, is just to support, as I was saying in my earlier talks, about allowing achievement of learning outcomes. We, as a literacy organization, we're absolutely keen on making sure that girls and boys can read, and that is like a gateway skill that opens up other learning opportunities to them. But in terms of the opposition, we really haven't, I mean, I can't think of a single episode where we've had to answer, you know, what are you doing? Why are you supporting girls? Or why are you introducing these ideas of gender equality? So far, it's really not an issue. They're much more worried about, are my girls learning anything? Is it worth their time? Because they're making a decision to put them in school so that they're perhaps not doing something else. opportunity cost, opportunity lost, if they're they could be at home, you know, working or in the marketplace earning money. So if parents have put them in school, it's because they want them there.
Thank you so much, Scott. Now, we've got so many fantastic questions coming in. I'm going to combine two and ask the panelists who wants to start us off. So the two that I'm going to combine, recommendations for messages for boys and information about successful campaigns aimed at boys. And then also, we've got a question related to, give me one second. To what extent have the efforts to have male educators become advocates for gender equality in education paid off, or is this still a work in progress?
Oh, well, I'm happy to jump in. I'd start off with a work in progress with a long way to go. I think that there are some promising initiatives in thinking of the gender justice areas of South Africa, Sasanti's work. But I think it's a big one, and it actually kind of picks up on some of the question that was put to Scott about resistance. I've been in a lot of workshops and working with local partners, so I don't see myself as being the person. Like, I try to not be the center of that, but I think there's a lot for men to give up, and there's a lot that we need to do in terms of working with boys and men. And that's why when I gave that example of like really bringing men to not to task, that's a bit strong, but bringing them into the discussion of, well, would you want your sister to do this? What do you want for your daughters? How do you, like, there are a lot of questions that I think are very personal that are entry points to this work. And I think that is actually critical. I think we need way more men organizing workshops and being partners in this. But I really see, I think I've kind of not shifted, but I've really seen that unless we can bring men into this work in a really strong way, and that's why I think in the guide we're developing on gender responsive pedagogy, I'd like to see already, developing the second guide or the second set of materials coming from Sierra Leone or coming from Mozambique that really looks at this, because I really, mostly the institutions are led by men. It's so hard for women to speak up. If there's in a teacher's college where there are 40 instructors and 32 of them are men, we can say all we want about empowering women and sending women to workshops, but it's the men who need to go to the workshops too. So I think it's, and often women are carrying a whole lot of other loads in terms of domestic responsibility and their own careers. So putting gender on the shoulders of women alone is really, really difficult. And I think that this is definitely the area that a lot of us, I think, are realizing we want to continue to work with girls and young women, absolutely, but to think about that question, and it is totally a work in progress.
Do we have time for me to add one sentence to that?
Yes, please do, and then I'm going to direct a question to you. Thank you, Nora.
Well, I was reflecting, fantastic question. I was reflecting on our work with the GPE on gender responsive education sector planning. And when we started to work on planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation, guess who we met? We met the men in the Ministry of Education. And so the workshops we ran were at least 50% men. And that allowed us to engage with them around gender questions in their work. They knew to be efficient, they were going to have to figure out a way to deal with gender issues in their plans, policies, in monitoring, in budgeting this stuff. And so it was in their best interest to learn something. Now, we always did have some kind of meltdown about something around, girls getting pregnant or something, and we had some kind of a conscious experience. However, consistently, the men came and showed up. It was the best thing was to go to their realm of interest and expertise and allow them to bring their contribution and then to explore gender issues within that. Let me just also shout out to Minister Senge from Sierra Leone, who launched the policy of radical inclusion recognizing that there needed to be an end to this ban on girls going back to school after they were pregnant. And that has fundamentally reformed what's going on in the education system in Sierra Leone. And he is now a global advocate and champion for girls' education, and very, very comfortable there. He's seated in the best interest of his country, and therefore, why not? Male or female, he's ready to go there.
Thank you, Nora. I'm going to direct the next question to you. We have learned that community-based participatory programs often yield the most positive, impactful changes in education and development overall. So what are the lessons that we have learned from localized projects on creating gender-positive education that we can implement to the national or international systems change for education?
Well, that's an enormous, you're asking me?
Yeah. I'm going to start with you. And if the other panelists want to add in, you know, with the 2 minutes we have left.
That's an enormous question. I actually am busy reviewing research proposals, one of which is exactly on scale up. And it's one of the biggest challenges and a lot of effort trying to figure out how to go from pilot to scale, right? Because sometimes you can ground something in a community environment. They're so well, it puts you in the best position to engage community members, leaders, to make changes incrementally and allow them to take it on. But to go to scale from that is always one of the most challenging processes. Now, best practice is to keep consulting your community in order to get their advice on how to scale, and then engage the Ministry of Education in the process so they get in from the outset. One example of that is a very successful experience in Uganda. Raising voices, they've proven, they came up with a good school toolkit, how to break down practices of gender-based violence in schools. They were very successful, but it has still taken some time. They've even actually had exploring how to export the whole program, but it's still taking time to bring the Ministry of Education on board. And they said, you know, if you'd brought us in from the beginning, it would have been a lot better. We could have helped you scale up. So we've learned a lot about that. But why is community-based participatory work so effective? Well, you know, you give the opportunity to community people to share their expertise and to lead in their communities where they're best equipped to know what to do and how well to do it. It's going to be successful. We need to learn a lot more about scale up, particularly now, as we're trying to learn from innovative approaches, which colleagues have been trying out in various countries to address the limitations, the restrictions of COVID, and learn how to bring that to bear, not only in when the schools are closed, but as they open, to learn from that experience and then to scale them. But that's a PhD question, which I hope someone in Claudia's team will take up someday.
Thank you, Nora. Claudia, would you like to add? And Scott, would you like to add as well? Claudia, go ahead.
We are. Lots of people are, but I'll also say if there are any funders out there or any large organizations that are reviewing proposals, this is one of the areas that we need lots of evidence for. It's like one of those things, oh yeah, this works, this is great. I think we really need a lot more support in terms of documenting this work and taking that kind of evidence and using it, feeding it back in. It's people speaking and people feeding that right back into the program. So I'm all for more research and more fitting that back into the evidence platforms that we're developing.
And I think we are more into this type of conversation. This has been phenomenal. Thank you so much to our panelists. I want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. We are only 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes over. Claudia, Nora, Scott, Alcina, this has been such an informative session. Thank you to all of the participants for joining, for your engagement. We couldn't even get to all of the Q&A, which just shows how rich this discussion is and that we need to keep this discussion going. It was so fantastic to hear from your perspectives. Thank you, participants, for your perspectives, for sharing, for engaging, and most importantly, for taking time during what it is that we've been experiencing over the last 14 months and focusing on this question of how we can create girl-positive classrooms. Panelists, thank you so much. Such a rich discussion. Participants, thank you so much for joining. Organizers, we are so appreciative. I want to just say one last thing, which is that I hope all of you continue to take good care of yourselves, and please, please, please take good care of each other. Thank you for a fantastic inaugural event, and we look forward to providing you with more valuable virtual learning opportunities. Take good care, everyone, and thank you once again. Please join me in the chat box thanking our fantastic panel. Take good care. Bye, everyone.